Welcome to A Student of Leadership, a micro-podcast where leaders are made one habit at a time. Hosted by Rob Adams, a leadership veteran with 30 years of experience, this podcast explores key concepts that define exceptional leadership. Each episode delves into a powerful word or strategy, offering practical insights and real-world stories. Whether you're just starting out or an experienced executive, join Rob as he guides you in learning, growing, and leading with purpose.
Hello, and welcome back to A Student of Leadership podcast. I'm Robert Adams, and this is episode 66. We are going to be talking today about leading across the generations. This week, we are closing May with the element that started the place-setting framework back at the beginning of April, the table. But this time, the question is not just what kind of table you are building. It is whether every generation that needs to sit at it actually feels like there is a seat for them. And on Monday, the Leadership Table newsletter on Substack opened up with an argument I think is important. The generational profiles that dominate most of the leadership conversation about this topic are mostly a distraction. Not because the generations are the same, but because the answer is not in the profiles. Link in the show notes for that Monday newsletter. And Friday's Breaking Bread on LinkedIn closes May with one conversation that you can have this week to test whether your table is working across the generations. That drops at 6:45 a.m., that's right, Eastern Standard Time, also in the show notes with the link. If you missed our last week, episode 65, we went into the napkin and the argument that mental health is a leadership issue, not a benefit program. The Deloitte data on manager impact. 3 things a leader does when they actually see the whole person. That episode is in your feed, and it is an important one for anyone leading teams in food service, hospitality, or any industry right now. Here's where I want to start things today. The conversation about Gen Z in the workforce, the conversation about boomers and millennials and the generational divide is one of the most over-discussed and under-resolved topics in leadership right now. There are entire industries built around telling leaders what each generation wants, how they communicate, what motivates them, how to manage the friction between them, and most of it misses the point. Every generation at your table wants the same things. They want to be seen as a person. They want to do work that matters. They want to know the person leading them is worth following. They want to feel like they belong at the table before they invest in building it. Now, these are not generational preferences. These are human needs no matter where you're at in the generational curve. What is different across the generations is what people have been taught to expect. Whether those needs are likely to be met. How quickly they disengage when they're not. And those expectations are shaped by the world each generation grew up in and the economic conditions they entered the workforce during. The technology they are native to, and the organizations that shaped them early. Understanding that is genuinely useful. Now, what is less useful is treating it as sorting exercise where you manage the Gen Z associate one way and the boomer supervisor another way and call it inclusive leadership. In food distribution and food service in general, the generational range on most teams is wider than most any other industry. I've worked in environments where the team on any given morning spanned 40 years of working experience. A veteran warehouse associate who has been on the dock for 20 years. A recent hire for whom this is their real first varied job they've ever done. A middle manager who came up in the era when you proved yourself through endurance before you asked for anything. A younger supervisor who was told from day one that their voice and perspective were valued. These people are not problems to be managed to their generational type. They are assets to be aligned. And alignment does not come from the profile. It comes from the table. Now let me talk about each group and what is actually carrying, because I think the honest version of this is more useful than the polished version. The research on Gen Z in the workplace is consistent on a few things. They want to know why, not as a philosophical position, as a practical need. They grew up with the ability to look up the reasoning behind any process or rule in seconds. Their expectation is that they would simply comply without context, and that feels disconnected from how they understand information works. It's not a generational character flaw. It's an adaptation to the environment they were formed in. The leader who gives them the why is not accommodating weakness. They are closing a gap that costs nothing and gains genuine engagement. They also want feedback that goes in both directions. We talked about feed forward, how important and how much that shifts the conversation from defensive to embracing. Immediate, specific, and not just one way. It can't be top down. The annual review and the one-way performance conversation feel archaic compared to the constant feedback loops they were raised with in every other part of their lives. Again, not a character flaw. This is an expectation. And a leader who finds a way to build more frequent and bi-directional development conversations into their rhythm does not lose accountability. In fact, they gain credibility. And they want to see that advancement is possible. Not guaranteed, just possible. They are watching whether the people ahead of them got there through merit or through time served. If it looks like the latter, they will not invest in a culture that does not invest in them. Now the other side. The experienced professionals on your team, the ones who've been in food distribution or food service for 2 or 3 decades, are carrying something completely different. They were developed, in many cases, in a culture that told them to prove themselves before they asked for anything, to earn the right to be heard before expecting to be listened to. They built their credibility through output and endurance, and that credibility is real. The institutional knowledge on your most tenured team members represents decades of things that do not appear in any documentation and cannot be replicated by any system. What they notice is whether you see that, whether you acknowledge what they've built, whether the accommodations and conversations and development investment you extend to newer team members reflect any recognition of what they never received and still delivered. The friction between generations in most food service operations is not philosophical. It's practical. The veteran driver who's been running the same routes for 15 years watching a newer hire get treated with what looks like difference, they were never shown what reads that as disrespect or what they built. You see, that friction is real and it's addressable, not by telling the veteran driver to be more open to new approaches, by acknowledging specifically and visibly the value of what they've created. Both things can be true at once. The new hire deserves context and genuine investment. The veteran deserves visible recognition of their contribution. And the table that holds both of those things is the one where people from different generations actually work well together. Now, here's 3 things a leader does to build that table. First, name what you value from each person, not from a generational perspective. As an individual, the veteran driver knows things about the routes that the customers and the operation that a new hire will not know for years. Name that. Make it visible in a meeting, in a one-on-one, in a moment that the rest of the team can observe. The younger associate brings perspectives on processes and technology and efficiency that the organization generally needs. Name that too. Both pieces of value exist, and most leaders only make one of them visible. Now, 2, build consistency across the generations without eliminating individuality. The standard applies to everyone. How you help people meet the standard can reflect what they actually need. A newer team member might need the why behind a standard. A veteran might need acknowledgement that the standard that they've been holding for years is the right one. You see, consistency is not sameness. It is the reliable application of the same principles in service of the same outcome. Make the table visibly worth building toward. In fact, the most powerful retention tool for every generation is really the same thing. Evidence that the table is generally worth sitting at. Not just the compensation, the culture, the development, the way leaders treat people in those ordinary moments. That evidence accumulates in the daily acts, in the moments when nothing requires you to be present and you are anyway. Now, AI is doing interesting things in this space. Platforms that adapt learning content by experience level. Tools that help leaders track the development needs of team members across experience ranges. Systems that surface gaps in generational representation in leadership pipelines. These tools do have genuine value, but what they cannot do is create the cultural conditions that make every generation feel like the table was set for them. That is human leadership act, built in ordinary moments, one conversation at a time. Now, this closes May. I can't believe how fast it's gone. Here we are. We opened up the month with the spoon and what it means to pour into others without keeping score. We moved through the glass and the shift from feedback to feed forward that changes how development lands. We talked about the napkin and the dignity in the small moments that determines whether people feel seen as people or managed as functions. And today, in this episode, the table in its second appearance. Next month, we open June with the plate returning, leading through change when everyone is completely exhausted. Now, that one is going to carry some real weight. The Leadership Table newsletter is on Substack every Monday morning at 6 Eastern Standard Time. It is in the link in the show notes. And Friday's Breaking Bread closes May with the play worth running into June. Link is also in the show notes. And please, if you are enjoying these podcasts at all, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, any of the major podcast networks host the show. So you are ready to get into June and are already a subscriber. And both links for Apple and Spotify are also in the show notes. And as always, if this episode gave you something, please share it with someone you care about, a leader who is navigating a multi-generational team right now and is not sure where to start. The answer is not in the profiles. It's in the table. Now, I want you to run the play this week. Pick 2 people on your team, one veteran and one newer one. Name what each of them brings individually and visibly. 2 conversations, 2 pieces of evidence that the table was set for both of them. That is the table across generations. That is the work, everyone. I thank you so much for listening. I'm honored and grateful for every moment that you spend with me at A Student of Leadership. I'm Robert Adams, and I, like you, am still on the journey of learning and developing too. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of A Student of Leadership. Leadership is about who we become and how we help others grow. If you found value in this podcast, share it with a fellow leader and connect with Rob on LinkedIn or leave a review. New episodes drop weekly, so don't forget to subscribe to stay connected. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and leading with intention. Remember, great leaders are made one habit at a time. See you next time on A Student of Leadership.